In the vast expanse of the Galactic Empire, where technology had rendered individual skill obsolete and automated warfare dominated the stars, there existed a simple truth that every species had learned to accept. Humans were outdated relics of a primitive past. Their slow reflexes, limited and biological fragility made them amusing curiosities at best, tolerated servants at worst. But in the darkest corners of space, where legends were whispered among smugglers and rebels, there lived stories of something far more dangerous than any plasma cannon or quantum destroyer. Stories of an old human who had once been the Empire's greatest asset before becoming its most feared nightmare. A man whose name was spoken only in hushed tones, whose very existence challenged everything the galaxy believed about human limitations. They called him Death, and for 40 years he had been hiding. Now, as the Empire's most elite forces prepare to crush the final human resistance, they're about to discover that some weapons never become obsolete. Some skills transcend technology, and some humans are born to remind the universe why their species earned the right to walk among the stars. The Empire is about to learn that when you corner a legendary predator, when you threaten everything he's sworn to protect, when you force an old soldier to pick up his rifle one last time. Death always fires back. Adjusted the scope on his ancient rifle for what he hoped would be the last time today. The weapon was a relic by galactic standards, a crude projectile launcher that most species would consider laughably primitive. While the rest of the galaxy had moved on to energy weapons and smart ammunition, still preferred the satisfying weight of metal and wood in his hands. From his position on the rocky outcrop, he could see the settlement below through the morning mist. New Terra was barely worthy of the name, just a collection of prefabricated structures housing 3,000 human refugees who had fled the Empire's latest relocation efforts. It wasn't much, but it was home to people who had nowhere else to go. Was 72 years old, though his steady hands and sharp eyes belied his age. The other settlers knew him as a quiet farmer who kept to himself, tending a small plot of vegetables and rarely speaking unless spoken to first. They had no idea that the unassuming old man had once been the most feared sniper in the galaxy, a legend whispered about in military circles across a dozen star systems. The Empire had called him Death. That was a lifetime ago, before the Great Betrayal, before he had watched his entire unit gunned down by the same commanders who had once pinned medals on his chest. Before he had disappeared into the Outer Rim territories, leaving behind a reputation built on impossible shots and confirmed kills that numbered in the thousands. A soft beeping from his wrist communicator pulled him from his memories. Sarah's voice crackled through the static. "You out there? We've got incoming signals from the edge of the system." Keyed his response while never taking his eyes off the settlement. "How many?" "Looks like a full battle group. 3 heavy cruisers, escort frigates, and what our sensors are reading as a command dreadnought." Sarah's voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many settlements burned. "They'll be here in 6 hours." 6 hours. Felt something cold settle in his stomach. The Empire didn't send command dreadnoughts for routine operations. They sent them when they wanted to make examples, when they wanted to ensure that nothing survived to tell the tale. "Any chance they're just passing through?" asked, though he already knew the answer. "Negative. They're broadcasting Imperial Edict 447 on all frequencies, complete evacuation and sterilization protocols." Sarah paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They're going to glass the entire planet." Closed his eyes and let out a slow breath. Orbital bombardment would reduce New Terra to molten slag within minutes. There would be no escape, no negotiation, no mercy. The Empire had decided that this small pocket of human independence was too dangerous to allow to exist. "Start the evacuation protocols," said finally. "Get everyone to the underground shelters. Maybe some of them can ride it out." "The shelters won't protect against orbital bombardment, and you know it," Sarah replied. "We need to consider other options." Other options. Knew what she was really asking. He had been running from his past for 40 years, but now his past was the only thing that might save these people. The old rifle in his hands suddenly felt heavier, weighted down with memories of 1,000 battles and the ghosts of enemies who had underestimated what one human could do with the right weapon and the will to use it. "Sarah, I need you to patch me through to the Imperial Command Channel," said. "What? That's suicide. The moment they triangulate your signal." "Just do it." There was a long pause before Sarah's reluctant voice came back. "Channels open. Whatever you're thinking, please reconsider." Lifted the communicator to his lips and spoke in the calm, measured tone that had once struck fear into the hearts of Imperial officers across the galaxy. "Imperial Command, this is. I believe you know me by another name." The response was immediate, crackling with static and barely contained excitement. "This is Admiral aboard the Dreadnought Inevitable, is dead. He died 40 years ago on station." "No, Admiral, retired 40 years ago on station. Death just went into hiding." Chambered around in his rifle, the metallic click carrying clearly over the comm. "I'm transmitting coordinates for a meeting. Just you and me, ground level. We settle this the old way." Admiral's laugh was like grinding metal. "You're insane if you think I'm going to face some washed-up human sniper in single combat. I have enough firepower to turn that entire planet into vapor." "Yes, you do," agreed. "But then you'd never know if you could have taken the great in a fair fight. Think about it, Admiral. You could be the one who finally put death to rest. Your name would be spoken with reverence in Imperial military academies for generations." The channel went quiet for several minutes. Could imagine the furious debate happening on the command bridge, officers arguing over whether it was worth the risk to engage the legendary sniper. Pride was a powerful motivator, especially among the Empire's officer class. When Admiral finally responded, his voice carried a new edge of interest. "Even if I agreed to this ridiculous challenge, what makes you think you can take on the entire Imperial Navy single-handedly?" Smiled grimly as he sighted down his scope at a rock formation nearly 2 miles away. "Because, Admiral, you made one critical mistake. You assumed I was alone." He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with familiar comfort, and 2 miles away, the rock formation exploded in a shower of stone and metal. Hidden beneath the rocks had been an Imperial surveillance drone, probably dropped hours ago to monitor the settlement. Through his scope, watched the debris scatter across the valley floor. The comm channel erupted in angry voices. "Impossible shot," someone was shouting. "No human can make a kill at that range." "I just did," said calmly. "And Admiral, that was just a warm-up. If you want to see what I can really do, accept my challenge. One-on-one combat, ground rules of your choosing. If you win, my people surrender without a fight. If I win, your fleet leaves this system and never returns." Admiral's voice had lost its mocking tone. "And if I refuse?" Began walking down the hill toward the settlement, his rifle slung across his back. "Then you glass this planet like you planned, and you spend the rest of your life wondering if you were too much of a coward to face one old human. Your choice, Admiral." As walked, he could see the settlement coming to life below him. People were emerging from their homes, pointing at the sky where the first traces of the Imperial fleet were becoming visible as bright stars against the morning sky. Children were crying, mothers were gathering supplies, and the men were checking their weapons with the grim determination of people who knew they were about to die. But had not spent 40 years in hiding just to watch these people burn. He had been death once, the Empire's greatest weapon turned against them. If that's what it took to save New Terra, then death would rise again. He just hoped he remembered how to be a killer. The comm channel crackled one more time. "Very well, I accept your challenge. Tomorrow at dawn in the valley between the settlement and the mountain range. Bring whatever weapons you choose. I'll be waiting." Smiled coldly. "I'll be there, Admiral and Admiral." "What?" "You might want to write your will tonight. I haven't missed a shot in 47 years, and I don't plan to start now." The channel went dead, leaving alone with his thoughts and the weight of 3,000 lives resting on his shoulders. He had 6 hours to prepare for the fight of his life, and 40 years of rust to shake off his skills. But as he felt the familiar comfort of his rifle against his back and the solid ground beneath his feet, began to remember why the Empire had once feared the name of death. Tomorrow, Admiral would learn that some legends never die. They just reload. The workshop beneath's modest farmhouse had remained untouched for 4 decades, sealed behind a hidden panel that most would never think to look for. As descended the narrow stairs, emergency lighting flickered to life, revealing a shrine to a different time and a different man. Weapons lined the walls in careful arrangement. Rifles from a dozen different worlds, each one modified and customized for specific purposes. Ammunition in neat rows, some conventional, others designed for targets wearing advanced armor or energy shields. Maps of star systems covered one wall, marked with annotations in precise handwriting, detailing sight lines, wind patterns, and gravitational anomalies that could affect a long-range shot. In the center of the room sat a workbench, and on that bench lay the rifle that had made a legend. The Aurora-class precision rifle was a masterpiece of human engineering, built in the days when Earth's military still believed in the value of individual excellence over automated warfare. The weapon was over 6 feet long, its barrel crafted from rare metals that could maintain perfect accuracy across impossible distances. Picked up the Aurora with reverent hands. The rifle felt familiar, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. He had carried this weapon across 30 different battlefields, through sieges and skirmishes, during the glory days when humanity fought alongside the Empire instead of against it. The weapon's smart scope was decades ahead of anything the Empire had now, capable of calculating trajectories that accounted for planetary rotation, atmospheric density, and even quantum fluctuations in the target area. But the scope was just a tool. The real weapon was the man behind it. Sarah found him 3 hours later, surrounded by disassembled rifle components and the sharp smell of gun oil. She stood in the doorway, taking in the hidden armory with wide eyes. "My God, you really were him, weren't you? The sniper the Empire called Death." Didn't look up from his cleaning. "That was a long time ago, different war, different man." The same man who just challenged an Imperial admiral to single combat. Sarah moved closer, studying the weapons with professional interest. The same man who made a 2-mile shot this morning like it was nothing. "Muscle memory," said simply. "Some things you never forget, no matter how much you want to." Sarah picked up one of the smaller rifles, checking the action with practiced ease, raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I wasn't always a settlement coordinator," she explained. 20 years in the colonial marines before the Empire decided humanity was too dangerous to trust with weapons. She set the rifle down carefully. "I know what you're trying to do, but you can't face an entire battle group alone." Slid the Aurora's bolt home with a satisfying click. "I'm not planning to face the entire battle group, just one very arrogant admiral who thinks his reputation can match mine." "And after you kill him, you think his officers are just going to pack up and leave?" "That depends on how I kill him." Began loading specialized ammunition into the rifle's magazine. Each round was handcrafted, designed to penetrate the personal shielding that Imperial officers wore. "Fear is a powerful motivator, Sarah. If I can make them afraid enough, they might decide this backwater settlement isn't worth the risk." Sarah shook her head. "You're talking about psychological warfare against a species that conquered half the galaxy. What makes you think they'll scare that easily?" Stood and shouldered the Aurora, checking the balance and weight. The rifle felt perfect in his hands, an extension of his will and intent. "Because 40 years ago, I was the reason Imperial officers checked the shadows before they slept. I was the reason they wore armor to bed and never traveled alone. One man with the right weapon and the willingness to use it can terrorize an entire army." He turned to face Sarah directly. "The Empire has spent 4 decades believing that humans are weak, that we're nothing more than clever animals playing with tools we don't understand. Tomorrow, I'm going to remind them why they were wrong." Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "You're not planning to come back from this fight, are you?" Was quiet for several heartbeats. "I'm 72 years old, Sarah. I've lived longer than I had any right to expect. These people, this settlement, they have decades ahead of them if someone gives them the chance." He slung the Aurora across his back. "If my death can buy them that chance, it's a fair trade. And if you win, then maybe an old man gets to remember what it felt like to be young again." As the night deepened, made his way through the settlement, moving from house to house in a pattern that seemed random but was actually carefully calculated. He was checking sight lines, memorizing terrain features, and most importantly, saying goodbye to the people he had lived among for 40 years. At the family house, he found 8-year-old Tommy practicing with a wooden sword in the backyard. The boy looked up as approached, his face serious beyond his years. "Mr. Mama says bad men are coming to hurt us." "That's right, Tommy, but I'm going to stop them." "Are you scared?" Knelt down to the boy's level. "A little, but being scared isn't what makes you a coward, son. Being scared and doing the right thing anyway, that's what makes you brave." Tommy nodded gravely. "Will you teach me to shoot like you when the bad men are gone?" "I'd be honored too," lied gently. He He wouldn't live to see another sunset, but the boy didn't need that burden tonight. At the farm, found old George sitting on his porch, cleaning an ancient shotgun with arthritic hands. George had been a soldier once in the early days of human expansion, and he understood what was happening better than most. "Heard you called out their admiral," George said without looking up. "That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the—" "Probably both," admitted. "George, I need a favor." "Name it." "After tomorrow, the settlement's going to need leadership. Real leadership, not just someone to coordinate supply drops." Sat down on the porch steps. "These people trust you. They'll follow you." George finally looked up from his weapon. "You're talking like you're not going to be here." "I might not be. If something happens to me, don't let them scatter. Keep them together, keep them strong. The Empire respects strength, even in humans." George was quiet for a long time. "My grandfather fought in the Earth Wars before we ever reached the stars. He used to tell stories about men like you, snipers who could change the course of a battle with a single shot. Always wondered if those stories were true." "Some of them were," said. "The best ones usually are." As dawn approached, took his position on the ridge overlooking the valley where the challenge would take place. He had chosen the location carefully. The morning sun would be at his back, making it difficult for the admiral to spot him until it was too late. The terrain provided excellent cover and multiple escape routes, though didn't expect to need them. Through his scope, he watched the Imperial shuttle descend from orbit, its sleek hull reflecting the early morning light. The craft was a work of art, all flowing lines and advanced materials that could shrug off anything short of a direct hit from a capital ship's main guns. Admiral emerged from the shuttle with the confidence of someone who had never truly been challenged. He was tall for a nearly 7 feet of scaled muscle and bone, wearing ceremonial armor that probably cost more than most human settlements earned in a year. Behind him came 6 bodyguards in full combat gear, their weapons trained on the surrounding terrain. Smiled coldly. The admiral had agreed to single combat but brought backup anyway, typical Imperial arrogance. Through his comm unit, heard Admiral's voice boom across the valley. "I am here as promised. Show yourself if you have the courage to face me directly." Keyed his communicator. "I'm here, Admiral, but first we need to discuss the terms. Single combat means single combat. Tell your bodyguards to return to the shuttle." "These are my personal guards. They go where I go." "Then you're not honoring the agreement." Adjusted his scope slightly, centering the crosshairs on the leftmost bodyguard. "I suggest you reconsider. You're in no position to make demands human. You're outnumbered and—" Squeezed the trigger. The Aurora bucked against his shoulder, and a mile away, the bodyguard's head exploded in a shower of blue blood and bone fragments. The remaining guards immediately raised their weapons, scanning frantically for the source of the shot. "5 bodyguards," said calmly into the comm. "Shall I continue demonstrating why your numbers don't matter?" Admiral's voice was no longer quite so confident. "Stand down," he barked at his remaining guards. "Return to the shuttle immediately." The guards hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave their commander exposed. Admiral repeated his order, and slowly, reluctantly, they began backing toward the shuttle. "Now then," said, "let's discuss the real terms of this engagement." As the shuttle lifted off, leaving Admiral alone in the valley, began to feel the familiar calm that came before a shot that would change everything. One squeeze of the trigger, one perfect shot, and either New Terra would be saved or would die trying. Either way, the Empire was about to learn that death had never really gone away. He had just been waiting for the right target. Admiral stood alone in the valley, his ceremonial armor gleaming in the morning sun. At 7 feet tall, he was an imposing figure even without his bodyguards, his reptilian features set in an expression of cold fury. The death of his guard had shaken him, but pride ran deeper than fear. "Impressive shot, human," the Admiral called out, his voice carrying easily across the valley. "But hiding in the rocks like a coward doesn't make you a warrior." Didn't respond immediately. Through his scope, he studied his opponent carefully. The Admiral's armor was top-tier Imperial technology, capable of deflecting energy weapons and absorbing massive kinetic impacts. But had spent decades learning the weaknesses of Imperial equipment. Every piece of technology had flaws and had built his reputation on exploiting them. The armor's joints were the obvious target, but Admiral knew that. He moved with the calculated precision of someone who had trained extensively in anti-sniper tactics. His movements were unpredictable, never lingering in one position long enough for a careful shot. The Admiral was good, admitted to himself, but good wasn't legendary. "You want a fair fight, Admiral?" finally replied over the comm. "Then let's make it interesting." Rose from his concealed position, the Aurora cradled in his arms. He was over a mile away from Admiral, but through the scope he could see the Admiral's head snap toward his location. This enhanced vision was better than human standard, but not good enough to make out details at this range. "There you are," Admiral said with satisfaction, "finally showing yourself like a true warrior." "I'm going to give you a sporting chance, Admiral," began walking down the hillside, moving with the steady gait of someone who had navigated hostile terrain for 7 decades. "I'm going to close the distance, make this a real fight instead of an execution." Admiral reached for the plasma rifle strapped to his back, a weapon capable of melting through tank armor at close range. "How generous of you, but I think I'll end this quickly." The Admiral raised his weapon and fired. The plasma bolt screamed across the valley, superheating the air in its passage. Dove behind a boulder just as the rock face exploded in molten fragments. The heat was intense even through his protective clothing. "Did you really think I would make this easy for you?" Admiral called out, his voice filled with amusement. "I am the commander of the 47th Imperial Fleet. I have reduced entire star systems to ash. One aging human sniper is barely worth my attention." Checked his rifle and ammunition. The Admiral was trying to provoke him into making a mistake, goading him into abandoning cover for a wild shot. It was standard Imperial psychological warfare, and it might have worked on a younger man driven by pride, but had learned patience in the hardest school imaginable. He had spent days in hostile terrain, waiting for the perfect shot while enemies searched for him. He could wait as long as necessary. "Tell me something, Admiral," said as he moved to a new position behind a cluster of rocks. "How many humans have you killed personally?" Another plasma bolt scorched the air where it had been moments before. "Thousands, tens of thousands. Your species is like a virus, spreading across the galaxy and contaminating everything you touch." "And how many of them shot back?" There was a pause in the Admiral's response, just long enough for to know he had struck a nerve. "What difference does that make?" "All the difference in the galaxy," replied. He had found a new position with a clear line of sight, but the range was still too great for a guaranteed hit. The Admiral was smart enough to keep moving, never presenting a stationary target. Made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he had developed over decades of warfare. He stood up from behind his cover and began walking directly toward Admiral, the Aurora held casually in his hands. "What are you doing?" the Admiral demanded, raising his plasma rifle but not firing immediately. "I'm giving you what you wanted," replied calmly. "A fair fight, man to man, warrior to warrior." "You're insane. I can kill you from here with a single shot." "Yes, you can. The question is, will you?" Continued walking, never wavering in his approach. The range was dropping steadily, 1,000 meters, 900, 800. Each step brought him closer to the optimal range for the Aurora, but it also made him a clearer target for the Admiral's plasma weapon. "Stop," Admiral commanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Stop walking or I'll fire." "No, you won't," said with absolute certainty. "Because if you kill me at range like this, everyone will know you were afraid to face me properly. Your own officers will whisper that Admiral was too much of a coward to duel the legendary death." 700 meters, 600. Could see the Admiral's face clearly now, could read the mixture of rage and confusion in those alien features. Admiral had expected a conventional sniper battle, a contest of hidden positions and patient waiting. He had not expected to simply walk into the open and dare him to fire. "You think I care about honor?" the Admiral snarled. "I care about victory." "Then fire," challenged. "Kill an unarmed man walking toward you. Show the galaxy what Imperial honor really means." 500 meters. Admiral raised his plasma rifle, sighting down the barrel at its approaching form. The weapon could vaporize a human being at this range, turn flesh and bone into superheated gas in milliseconds. But the Admiral didn't fire. 400 meters, 300, was now close enough to see the sweat beading on Admiral's scaled forehead. Though was breathing heavily, his grip on the plasma rifle white-knuckled with tension. "What's wrong, Admiral?" asked conversationally. "Having trouble pulling the trigger." "Shut up," Admiral screamed. "Just shut up and die." The Admiral fired wildly, the plasma bolt going wide by several meters. The miss was so obvious that even Admiral's own fleet would have seen it through their telescopes. Didn't even flinch. 200 meters, 150, was now within easy range for either weapon, close enough to see the fear in Admiral's eyes. "You want to know the difference between us, Admiral?" said as he continued his relentless approach. "You've spent your career killing defenseless civilians and unarmed prisoners. You've never faced someone who could kill you back." "I am a warrior," Admiral protested, but his voice was shaking now. "No," replied simply. "You're a bully with advanced technology, and now, for the first time in your life, you're facing someone who isn't afraid of you." 100 meters, finally stopped walking and raised the Aurora to his shoulder in one fluid motion. The movement was so smooth, so practiced, that it seemed almost casual, but Admiral could see the deadly precision in every gesture. "Your move, Admiral," said softly. Admiral raised his plasma rifle with trembling hands, trying to draw a bead on the human who stood calmly in the open. The weapon was shaking so badly that hitting anything would be pure luck. By contrast, was perfectly still. The Aurora was rock-steady in his hands, the scope zeroed in on Admiral's center mass. At this range, couldn't miss even if he wanted to. "You know what your real mistake was, Admiral?" asked, his finger resting lightly on the Aurora's trigger. "What?" Admiral whispered, still trying to steady his aim. "You assumed that because I was old, I was weak, that because I'd been hiding, I was afraid. But I wasn't hiding from you, Admiral. I was protecting you from me." The shot, when it came, was anticlimactic. A single sharp crack that echoed across the valley, followed by the wet sound of Admiral's body hitting the ground. The plasma rifle fell from nerveless fingers, its charge dissipating harmlessly into the dirt. Lowered the Aurora and walked over to inspect his work. The shot had taken Admiral directly through the heart, punching through the ceremonial armor like it was made of paper. Death had been instantaneous. But knew the real battle was just beginning. High above, the Imperial fleet was watching through their sensors, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Their invincible admiral, their supreme commander, had been killed by a single human with an antique rifle. Activated his communicator, broadcasting on the fleet's command frequency. "Imperial fleet, this is, your admiral is dead. You have 1 hour to withdraw from this system." The response was immediate and predictable. "This is acting admiral aboard the Inevitable. You have just committed an act of war against the Empire. Prepare to be annihilated." Smiled coldly as he began walking back toward the settlement. "Acting Admiral, I want you to look up my service record. Pay particular attention to the engagement at Rigel VII, where I killed an entire battalion of your best troops. Look up the siege of Base, where I held off 3 Imperial fleets for 6 months with nothing but a rifle and determination." There was a long pause before responded. "Those records were classified." "Not classified, buried, because your empire didn't want anyone to know that one human could cause that much damage." Reached the edge of the settlement, where the residents were emerging from their shelters to stare at Admiral's body in the distance. "But I'm not the same man I was 40 years ago, acting Admiral. I'm older now, more experienced, more patient." "You're bluffing. One man cannot stand against an entire fleet." Looked up at the sky, where the Imperial ships were visible as bright stars against the morning sky. "Would you like to find out? Because I promise you this, acting Admiral. If you proceed with your bombardment, if you harm one person in this settlement, I will spend whatever time I have left hunting down every Imperial officer in this sector. And unlike your late Admiral, I won't give you the courtesy of a fair fight." The comm channel went silent. Could imagine the frantic discussions taking place on the Imperial bridge, officers arguing about whether the legendary death was bluffing or if he really could make good on his threat. Sarah appeared at side, her face filled with amazement and fear. "My God, you actually did it. You killed him." "That was the easy part," replied grimly. "Now we find out if the Empire believes their own propaganda about human weakness, or if they remember why they were afraid of us in the first place." High above, the Imperial fleet held position, their weapons trained on the planet below. But for the first time in decades, they hesitated to fire. Because somewhere on that planet was a man who had just reminded the galaxy that humans, when cornered and given no choice, could be the most dangerous predators in the universe. Death had returned, and the Empire was beginning to remember why that name had once been spoken only in whispers. Acting Admiral stared at the tactical display showing New Terra, his scaled fingers drumming nervously against the command console. Around him, the bridge crew of the Inevitable worked in tense silence, occasionally glancing at their commander with barely concealed anxiety. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander said carefully, "the bombardment crews are standing by. We can reduce that entire planet to slag within minutes." Didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled up the classified files that intelligence had reluctantly transmitted after his request. The records made for disturbing reading. Designated death by Imperial military intelligence. Confirmed kills in the thousands. Single-handedly responsible for the failure of 3 major Imperial campaigns in the Outer Rim territories. "Sir Prest, your orders." "Tell me, Commander," said slowly, never taking his eyes off the tactical display. "How many snipers does it take to cripple a fleet?" Looked confused. "Sir, I don't understand the question." "It's simple mathematics, Commander. We have 1,200 crew members across this battle group. Our ships require constant maintenance, regular supply runs, and shore leave for the crews. At any given time, at least 200 of our people are off their ships, either on stations or planetary installations." Highlighted several Imperial facilities on the star map. "If a sufficiently skilled assassin decided to hunt Imperial personnel, how long do you think it would take before our people became afraid to leave their ships?" "One man couldn't possibly." "One man just killed Admiral in single combat," interrupted. Admiral who had never lost a duel, who had conquered 17 star systems for the Empire, and this killed him like he was swatting an insect. The bridge fell silent. Everyone had watched the confrontation through the ship's sensors, had seen their invincible admiral reduced to a trembling, terrified figure who could barely hold his weapon steady. "What do you recommend, sir?" asked quietly. Before could answer, the communication console chimed with an incoming message. The operator looked up with wide eyes. "Sir, it's from the planet. Audio only." "Put it through." His voice filled the bridge, calm and conversational despite the circumstances. "Acting Admiral, I wanted to give you some additional information to consider before you make your decision." "Speak," said tersely. "I've been monitoring your communications, Admiral. Impressive security, but not perfect. I know you have supply convoys scheduled to arrive at Echo 7 in 3 days. I know you have crew rotations planned for the mining station at Edge. I know your wife lives on the administrative world of Prime, in a lovely house overlooking Lake Serenity." The blood drained from his face. "Are you threatening my family, human?" "I'm giving you context, Admiral. You see, for 40 years I've been a farmer. I've watched seeds grow into food that feeds families. I've seen children take their first steps, watched young people fall in love and start families of their own. I've remembered what it means to create instead of destroy." Waited, sensing there was more to come. "But you've just reminded me that some things are worth destroying for. Some things are worth killing for. If you bombard this planet, if you murder these innocent people, then I become something I haven't been for 4 decades. I become a hunter, and every Imperial officer in this sector becomes my prey." "You're one man," said, but his voice lacked conviction. "One man who knows where you live, Admiral. One man who knows the names of your children, the location of every Imperial installation within 50 light years, and the patrol routes of every ship in your fleet." Paused, letting the implications sink in. "One man who has 40 years of experience making impossible shots and disappearing without a trace." Lieutenant Commander was frantically working at his console, trying to trace the signal. He looked up and shook his head. "The transmission is being bounced through 17 different relay points. We can't pinpoint his location." "I could start with your supply convoys," continued conversationally. "A few key shots to disable their engines, leave them stranded in space. Then maybe some targeted strikes on communication arrays, leaving your bases blind and deaf. Eventually, I'd work my way up to more personal targets." Was sweating now, his uniform sticking to his scaled skin. "What do you want?" "I want you to leave, take your fleet and go back to whatever hole the Empire sent you from. Forget this planet exists. Forget you ever heard the name New Terra." "I have my orders," said weakly. "Your orders came from commanders who didn't know I was here. The strategic situation has changed, Admiral. You need to adapt accordingly. On the tactical display, one of the escort frigates was signaling the flagship. Open the channel reluctantly. Acting Admiral, this is Captain aboard the Retribution. Sir, are we really going to be intimidated by one human? Before could respond, his voice cut across the channel. Captain, isn't it? The man who glassed the civilian evacuation ships at Altair Colony. There was a shocked silence from the frigate. How do you know about that? Those records are sealed. Nothing stays sealed forever, Captain. I know about Altair. I know about the things you did to those civilian prisoners before you killed them. I know exactly what kind of monster you are. His voice had turned cold, deadly. And I want you to know, Captain, that if I survive today, you're going to be the first name on my list. The channel from the Retribution went dead so fast that it was clear Captain had cut the connection manually. Anyone else want to question my capabilities? Asked mildly. Looked around his bridge, seeing the fear in his officers' eyes. These were hardened veterans of dozens of campaigns, soldiers who had never backed down from a fight. But they were all thinking the same thing he was. They had families, homes, lives beyond the military. If this human was even half as dangerous as the legends suggested, none of them were safe. Sir, said quietly, perhaps we should consider a tactical withdrawal. Regroup, bring in specialists to deal with this threat. Specialists asked. Counter-sniper teams, hunter-killer squads. The Empire has resources specifically designed to deal with individual threats. Laughter came through the speakers, genuine and amused. Oh, Admiral, please do send your specialists. I haven't had a real challenge in decades. It'll be just like the old days. That decided it for the casual confidence in his voice, the complete lack of concern about facing Imperial Special Forces, told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't bravado or bluffing. This was a predator who genuinely looked forward to the hunt. Navigation, said finally, his voice heavy with defeat. Set course for the edge of the system. We're leaving. Sir looked stunned. We're retreating. We're making a strategic withdrawal, corrected. There's a difference. But the mission parameters have changed, snapped. We were sent to eliminate a human settlement. We were not told that settlement was defended by the most dangerous sniper in galactic history. As the Imperial fleet began to power up their engines, his voice came through one final time. Wise choice, Admiral, but remember this moment. Remember that you blinked first, because the next time the Empire decides to threaten innocent humans, they might not find me in such a forgiving mood. The channel went dead, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. Sir, the sensor operator called out, should we maintain surveillance on the planet? No, said firmly. We're leaving this system entirely. I don't want any Imperial presence within 50 light years of that world. That's going to require explanation to High Command, pointed out. Was already composing his report mentally. He would tell them about the human sniper, about the threat to Imperial personnel throughout the sector. He would recommend that New Terra be classified as a quarantine zone, too dangerous for Imperial forces to approach. He would not tell them about the fear he had seen in Admiral's eyes, or the way his own hands had started shaking during the confrontation. He would not admit that, for the first time in his career, he had been genuinely terrified by an enemy. As the Inevitable and her escorts jumped to hyperspace, leaving New Terra's system behind, found himself thinking about retirement. He had served the Empire faithfully for 30 years, had climbed the ranks through merit and dedication. But he had never faced anything like before, never encountered someone who could inspire such primal fear with nothing but words and reputation. The human hadn't even been trying to intimidate them, realized. He had simply been stating facts, laying out the logical consequences of their actions. That somehow made it even more terrifying. Down on New Terra, watched the Imperial fleet disappear into hyperspace, their sensor signatures fading from his displays. Around him, the settlement was celebrating, people emerging from their shelters with tears of relief and joy. Sarah found him sitting on his porch, the Aurora leaning against the railing beside him. You did it, she said simply. You saved us all. Nodded slowly, feeling the weight of 72 years settling on his shoulders. For now, but they'll be back eventually with more ships, better plans. Will you be ready for them? Looked out over the settlement, watching children play in the streets while their parents worked to rebuild what fear had torn down. As long as there are people worth protecting, I'll be ready. But privately wondered how many more times he could pull off a miracle. His reflexes weren't what they once were, his eyes weren't as sharp, his hands not quite as steady. Age was catching up with him, and eventually even legends had to face mortality. Still, today was not that day. Today, death lived, and the Empire had learned to fear again. That would have to be enough. 6 months after the Imperial fleet had fled New Terra, stood in the settlement's new memorial garden, reading the names carved into black stone. They weren't the names of the dead, but of the living. Every person whose life had been saved that day when death chose to fire back. 3,000 names. 3,000 reasons why an old soldier had picked up his rifle one last time. The settlement had grown since the Imperial withdrawal. Word had spread through the underground networks that there was a place where humans could live free, protected by the legendary sniper who had once terrorized the Empire. Refugees arrived almost daily, bringing skills, knowledge, and stories of Imperial atrocities from across the galaxy. Had mixed feelings about the attention. He had spent 4 decades trying to disappear, to become just another face in the crowd. Now, whether he liked it or not, he had become a symbol of human resistance. "Mister," a young voice interrupted his thoughts. Turned to see Tommy, now 8 months older and several inches taller, holding a wooden rifle that his father had carved for him. "Hello, Tommy. How's your marksmanship coming along?" The boy's face lit up with pride. "Mama says I'm getting better. Look." He shouldered the wooden weapon and sighted down the barrel at a target post 50 meters away. His stance was terrible, his grip all wrong, but there was genuine enthusiasm in his efforts. Knelt beside the boy and gently adjusted his position. Feet apart like this, the rifle should feel like an extension of your body, not like you're fighting it. "Did you always know how to shoot like this?" Tommy asked as he tried to follow his instructions. "No, son. It took years of practice, thousands of rounds, and more mistakes than I care to remember." Guided Tommy's hands to the proper grip. "The weapon doesn't make you dangerous, Tommy. Training, discipline, and knowing when not to shoot, that's what makes a marksman." "Will you teach me to shoot a real rifle someday?" Was quiet for a moment, watching the boy's earnest face. "That depends, Tommy. Can you tell me why someone would need to know how to shoot?" "To protect people," Tommy answered immediately. "Like you protected us from the bad aliens." "And when would you not shoot, even if you could?" Tommy thought hard about this. When the other person isn't trying to hurt anyone. "Good, what else?" "When there might be innocent people who could get hurt." "Very good, one more." Tommy scrunched up his face in concentration. When you're angry, Mama says we should never do important things when we're angry." Smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "Your mama is a wise woman. Yes, Tommy. When you're old enough and if you still want to learn, I'll teach you to shoot. But remember, the goal isn't to be the best killer, son. The goal is to protect the people you care about." As Tommy ran off to show his mother his improved stance, became aware that he wasn't alone. Sarah emerged from behind a cluster of trees, her expression thoughtful. "Teaching the next generation?" she asked. "Hopping I won't need to," replied, "but preparing them just in case." Sarah nodded toward the horizon, where construction crews were working on a new communications array. "The long-range transmitter is almost finished. Once it's online, we'll be able to coordinate with other human settlements, maybe even organize some kind of mutual defense network." "That's good," said, though his tone suggested reservations. "But," was quiet for a long moment, watching the construction crews work. "The more organized we become, the more of a threat the Empire will perceive us as. Right now, we're just one settlement that got lucky. But if we start networking with other colonies, sharing resources and intelligence, we become a legitimate resistance movement," Sarah finished, "and the Empire will respond accordingly. With overwhelming force, not one battle group next time, but entire fleets. They'll come with ships designed specifically to counter human tactics, weapons that can't be defeated by superior marksmanship." Picked up a small stone and turned it over in his weathered hands. "I scared them, Sarah, but fear only works as a deterrent until someone figures out a way around it." "So what do you suggest? That we stay isolated, keep our heads down and hope they forget we exist?" "No," said firmly. "We prepare, we train, we turn every human settlement into a fortress that the Empire will think twice about attacking." He looked at Sarah directly. And we make sure that when they do come back, it won't just be one old sniper standing in their way. Over the following weeks, threw himself into training with an intensity that worried the settlement's medical staff. He spent hours each day on the rifle range, pushing his aging body to maintain the standards that had made him legendary. His groups were still tight, his reflexes still sharp, but he could feel time catching up with him. More concerning were the reports filtering in through the new communication network. The Empire was mobilizing forces throughout the sector, not for immediate retaliation, but for something larger. Intelligence suggested they were developing new technologies specifically designed to counter human advantages in asymmetric warfare. Thermal dampening suits to defeat infrared scopes, read from the latest intelligence report. Predictive targeting systems that can calculate sniper positions based on bullet trajectories. Automated hunter-killer drones designed to operate independently of human controllers. He was in his workshop, surrounded by weapons and technical manuals, trying to devise countermeasures for technologies that hadn't even been deployed yet. It was an exercise that would have seemed hopeless to most people, but had spent his entire career adapting to new threats. The thermal suits won't help them if I use visual targeting, he muttered to himself, making notes on a tactical pad. The predictive systems assume standard ballistics, but if I vary my ammunition loads. A soft knock interrupted his planning. Looked up to see Dr. Elizabeth, the settlement's chief medical officer, standing in the doorway with a concerned expression. When was the last time you slept? Really slept, not just dozed off at your workbench? Consider the question seriously. Tuesday, I think. It's Saturday, Doctor said dryly. You can't keep pushing yourself like this. Your body isn't 25 anymore. My body doesn't get to retire until these people are safe, replied, turning back to his notes. Doctor stepped into the workshop and closed the door behind her. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without getting defensive. Something in her tone made look up. What is it? I've been running some routine medical scans on the long-term residents, checking for radiation exposure, genetic damage, the usual concerns for people living on a frontier world. She paused, clearly uncomfortable with what she had to say. Your scans show some anomalies. Set down his pen. What kind of anomalies? Cellular degradation consistent with extensive exposure to combat stims. Your nervous system shows signs of long-term stress damage, and there are indicators of genetic modifications that are. Well, they're not in any medical database I can access. Was quiet for a long moment. How long do I have? That's just it, I don't know. The modifications seem to be the only thing keeping you functional at your current level. Without them, you should have died of system failure decades ago. With them, she shrugged helplessly. You could live another 20 years or your enhanced metabolism could burn out tomorrow. But you have a professional opinion. Doctor sighed. Based on the rate of cellular degradation, I'd estimate you have maybe 2 years before your body starts shutting down. Maybe less if you continue pushing yourself at this pace. Nodded calmly, as if she had just given him a weather report. Thank you for telling me. That's it, that's your reaction. Doctor, I've been living on borrowed time for 40 years. Every day since I walked away from the Imperial service has been a gift. Picked up his pen and returned to his notes. 2 years is enough time to train a proper defense force. Enough time to set up the infrastructure these people will need to survive without me. Elizabeth, he said gently, using her first name for the first time since she had arrived at the settlement. I've had a good life. I've seen enough sunrises, drunk enough coffee, and saved enough lives to consider it time well spent. If I have 2 years left, I'm going to make sure they count. That knight stood on the highest hill overlooking New Terra, the aurora cradled in his arms like an old friend. The settlement spread out below him, lights twinkling in windows where families were settling down for the evening. Children's laughter carried on the wind, mixed with the sounds of construction and the quiet hum of daily life. In the distance, he could see the lights of other human settlements, connected now by the communication network that Sarah's people had built. Dozens of communities, thousands of people, all looking to New Terra as proof that humans could stand against the Empire and survive. Activated his personal communicator and opened a channel to the settlement's leadership council. Sarah, I need to call a meeting, tomorrow morning early. Is everything all right? Sarah's voice carried concern. Everything's fine, but we need to start planning for the future, the long-term future. I'll gather the council. What's this about? Looked up at the stars, where somewhere among the distant lights, Imperial fleets were preparing for war. It's about making sure that when the next admiral comes calling, New Terra will be ready, with or without me. He closed the channel and settled into a comfortable shooting position, the Aurora's scope trained on the horizon. There were no enemies to shoot tonight, no targets to engage. But the man they called Death would stand his watch as he had for 6 months, ready to fire back at any threat that dared to approach the people he had sworn to protect. Time was running out, but legends weren't measured in years. They were measured in the lives they saved and the hope they inspired. And by that measure, Slegend would outlive them all. In the darkness, an old soldier kept his vigil, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what tomorrow would bring to the settlement where Death had chosen to make his final stand. The Empire had learned to fear the name of, but they had not yet learned the most important lesson of all. Heroes never truly die. They just pass their weapons to the next generation and trust them to carry on the fight.